And Amy, and more sad news to report.
Oh no, Krusty the Clown died?
No, no. First Amazing Jonathan
Oh, okay. He's a
and
big dude.
Juice Cruz,
Juice Cruz?
Julio Juice Cruz from the White Sox.
Oh no. How did he die?
Second baseman for the White Sox. You'll remember September 17th, 1983,
Yes.
when Harold Baines hit a sacrifice fly. Juice Cruz came in, scored the run that won that game and clinched the AL Central for the winning ugly White Sox of 1983.
Never forget it.
It just seems like it was just yesterday.
Juice Cruz. How did
Juice
he
Cruz.
die?
I don't know. I just saw it posted that he passed on. So rest in peace, Juice Cruz too. Oh,
And the Amazing Jonathan. This is a bad day for you. Uh-oh, the show's not over yet. There's going to be a third. Uh-oh.
Maybe it'll be me. Our friend Robert Blackwell, we've had on the show before. He is a successful entrepreneur in Chicago. He wrote this piece for Crane Chicago Business. That's the business periodical in Chicago that's anti-business and pro-rent seeking. But, I understand. At least they published Robert Blackwell's piece, which is thoughtful, and that's rare in Cranes, of course, just a tool for the established power structure of kleptocrats, unfortunately. But Robert Blackwell tells us that we are on the precipice, there is a need for a fourth great movement of shared vision and commitment in this country. The first three, the 18th century, the American Revolution, the 19th century, abolition of slavery, the 20th century, the civil rights movement. He writes, today we have a mission that we must win, one that deserves our best efforts. The mission of the 21st century, the fourth great American movement, he calls it, which I think is interesting to put it in this context, is to prove that the free enterprise system works for everyone. It would seem to be not in controversy, but it very much is. I mean, you have an entire political party that has embraced 20th century socialism. Blackwell writes, the free enterprise system is the best way to create the hope, opportunity, and social capital that lifts individuals, communities, and nations from poverty to prosperity. And he's talking about this and this alpha mission, as he terms it, specifically as it pertains to black Americans and black American business owners. We've talked to him before. He doesn't want handouts. He doesn't want to be patronized. He doesn't want quotas. He doesn't want to play the game of racial politics. He just wants people to think about doing business with black business owners, purchasing a product from a black business owner. Why? Why that? He's education is important, but he's not focused on education. We talk a lot about opportunity scholarships. I've talked a lot to him about opportunity scholarships, and he's, all supportive of that. But that's not, in his view, the fourth great American movement that's needed. And he joins us now to explain why. Robert Blackwell, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it. Oh, I should mention IT professional, also Killerspin. He's almost an Olympic-level ping pong player.
Oh, that's right. Yep.
Yeah. Robert, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Hey, good morning. Good to talk to you.
Good to talk to you. So we were just reviewing the highlights from your piece in Cranes. So this fourth great American movement that you say is required, prove the free enterprise system works for everyone. And some might say, well, you look around at all the successful people and with the big houses and the fancy cars and these beautiful cities that have been built, and America's the richest, most prosperous nation the world has ever seen. Well, what's left to prove?
Well, it is true. It is the wealthiest country in the history of the world. And I think ours is I would say it is a good but imperfect nation. Mm-hmm. But I do think if you can just look at the facts of where blacks are in this country. So I did a study of the 2010 census, and I reviewed the 2020 census, and frankly, nothing's changed. If you took the revenues of all companies by ethnicities with employees, majority-owned companies spend 9.4 trillion, women $1 trillion, Asians 455 billion, Hispanics 276 billion, and blacks 98 billion. Even though blacks have double the educational achievement of Hispanics on average, but that's not even a real number. It is most of that is passed through. So what very few people would actually realize that all these diversity programs, all the, let's call the set-aside programs for minorities, blacks are at the bottom of participation in that. And for all these, wonderful statements of diversity and things like that, blacks still aren't getting any business. So you have to ask yourself, why is that? Is it, and I said there's three different, what I call kind of common myths that I would say people would say three different things typically. Blacks are in this situation because they lack initiative in education and business. So their assumption is their own bad behavior is what has caused the problem. A lot of people would say that. Very few people say that overtly today. Number two is there's got to be a secret society of white people who are dedicated to ensuring black people never succeed. A lot of people believe that, and I don't. Then the third is that education and sympathy is the only cure, so let's support inner city programs that teach these poor black people to be like us. Those are the three things that you hear, and you see these things in, especially the third one, in action. 100 years ago, well, more than 100 years ago, in 1895, Booker T. Washington gave a famous speech at the Atlanta Exposition, where he said the essence of that speech was America's never going to be what it can be until blacks get included in the economy. He said, we don't need to live around you, but we do have to be a part of the economy. And Julius Rosenwald, who was a Chicagoan, his family were Jewish immigrants. He was Chicagoan. He really built Sears.
Yeah.
And he said, what's happening to blacks in this country is wrong. We should do something about it. So he responded to Booker T. Washington. He wasn't prescriptive. He responded to Booker T. Washington's call to make a greater nation. Together, they built 5,300 schools in the South, which is how blacks got educated for the most part. Remember, through slavery, 90% of blacks lived in the Deep South. It was illegal to educate them. So they built 5,300 schools in the South. And Booker T. Washington focused his perspective on education was two things. One is the purpose of education is to teach you how to be a good citizen and to prepare you to be a part of the economy. They started the Negro Business League. He said the most important thing that blacks can do is to start business. More important than being an elected official. And he also talked to the white community about why it was important to engage with blacks. He said, we're either going to be the most loyal, productive citizens in the country, or we're going to be disproportionately involved in crime and other kind of bad activity. So the Black Wall Streets, which a number of people would have heard about, which are really called freedom colonies. Yeah. Freedom colonies. There's 81 of them across the country. The most famous one was in Tulsa, Oklahoma. So in 1910, a couple black entrepreneurs from Mississippi went to Oklahoma. They started the Greenwood District. And in a very short time, they created a prosperous black community. So two things happened. One is, by the way, at the time there were two airports in Oklahoma. One was in the Greenwood District. Blacks owned private airplanes in greater proportion than whites did. But then in 1922, you got the Tulsa Massacre. So it really proves two things. One is that the free enterprise system works when it's given an opportunity. But number two, the government has to do its job in protecting its citizens equally.
Well,
And
right.
obviously, it did neither.
But fast forward, and so all the advances that have been made in the last 100 years since the Tulsa massacre, and if it's not an evil cabal of white people holding blacks back, and it's not because blacks don't have the education initiative to do this, to be entrepreneurs, to be business owners and successful, then 100 years later, then what is holding blacks back, per those net worth figures as a function of race that you just went through? I mean, is it government largesse crowding out private investment and initiative?
No.
How do you put your finger on it?
There's two things, and this is, since I'm a fairly hardcore libertarian, I say every bad thing that's happened to the black community is because of government policy. Slavery, not educating blacks, Jim Crow, urban renewal. I could go on and on and on. The war on poverty. Lots of these things actually hurt the black community. So there's two things that have happened that are with blacks. One is there's been government policy that has been exclusionary. And I'm not talking about things like redlining and all that other stuff. I'm talking about as it relates to doing business. So when people talk about like all the money that has gone into these social programs and things like that, that most of the money goes through the filters, a kind of, I don't want to use this word wrong, but there's lots of charity and recipients of government funding that and it never really filters down. And by the way, no group has ever gone from poverty to prosperity based on somebody else's charity.
Mm-hmm.
The biggest problem that we have is that nobody does business with blacks.
Why?
There's only one way out of it.
Why is that? Why is that phenomenon at play?
Well, if you ask me, I think it is because of this infrastructure of charity in viewing blacks through the lens of charity.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're trying to save somebody, you don't look at them like an adult. I think that is a very big problem that we have. Nowhere in the country do people do business with blacks in the private sector or in the public sector in proportion to their talent. The only way out of poverty is entrepreneurial-led economic activity that leads to the appreciation of education and social capital. Social capital is when you reach back and you pull other people along, but more importantly, you create an aspirational roadmap for your young people so they know where to place their bets. So today, with all this diversity talk and stuff like that, this is mostly a bunch of corporate virtue signaling.
Mm-hmm.
Blacks aren't actually getting anything from it. Nobody's doing business in any real way with black companies.
And
Even
your
if you say,
and so sorry to interrupt, but and your argument is basically, to the question, and this is not meant to be impertinent, but hey, Robert, I want to buy a widget, and I want to buy the best quality widget I can get at the lowest price, and I don't care if it's a black or white or Asian-owned business. I just want the best widget. Your argument is to say, well, if there are substitutes, this widget is good as that widget, and this widget is produced by a black-owned business, you should think about buying the widget from the black-owned business, because the only way you prove and protect the free enterprise system is making sure that there is belief across all demographics in that system. And right now, that belief is faltering, particularly among black Americans.
no, actually, I would say the belief is actually it's faltering more amongst young white Americans than black Americans.
Well,
Young
yeah,
people are
but I think some of those opinions are very stylish. Those are people who don't preach what they practice, like the entire North Shore. I mean, so that's a little bit different a little bit different dynamic to me. But it was, so then with the underlying question, then you answer it. Two widgets, comparable, black-owned business, Asian-owned business. Why should I buy from the black-owned business?
Okay. Here's the thing. What I'm saying is, in order for us to prove that the free enterprise system works, everybody has to have an opportunity. Okay? Everybody needs to have an opportunity. So if you ask yourself in the question, how did India and China in a period of 20 years take 750 million people out of poverty? What they did is, and I was actually there in India and met with somebody in the finance ministry who gave me the story of India. What they did was, in 1991, they figured out socialism doesn't work. They started to free their economy. Their government started doing business with their small entrepreneurs, which prepared them for the international market. And then U.S. business just did business with capable Asian entrepreneurs. They didn't have any diversity and commitment, nonsense, or, midnight basketball programs for Indian kids. They just did business. But when it comes to blacks, all this commitment is around all these fuzzy social statements. It's a bunch of corporate virtue signaling for the most part, because nobody's getting any business, even people that are qualified. And the fact is, business gets done in networks. So it is a fallacy that business is simply done by the most qualified person. And by the way, we're mostly in a service industry.
Yeah, right.
Service economy today. So this is something why I am a very hardcore libertarian. I do believe, and I happen to know this because in my own experience, when I was in my 20s, I worked at IBM for a little while. In fact, IBM had a very strict no nepotism rule, but everybody in my family worked at IBM. And because the game is, my father says, you hire my kids, I'll hire yours.
Right.
So the networks matter. It is very rare that you get somebody who's affluent and their kids don't end up being affluent. It's not just because their kids are born talented. It's because they're part of networks that give them opportunity.
Well, that was what college was supposed
to
that's what college was supposed to provide, is access to networks that the disenfranchised didn't have access to before. But you're saying, well, that hasn't worked. And are you suggesting that we need sort of government to jumpstart, like the India model, if you will, government to jumpstart this doing business with black entrepreneurs, and it will radiate out from there? Then the networks are created from there.
Well, I would say there's two things. Since government, unfortunately, is 40% of GDP, everybody should do business. So I'll give you another story. In Atlanta, in 1973, the black business community and the white business community got together. They said blacks are going to have political power, whites have economic power. And they said, let's make an Atlanta that works for everybody. And they did. Atlanta's a very different city today than it was in the early 70s. And that was because of the voluntary cooperation of those business communities. And now Atlanta is 20% of blacks are actually self-employed in Atlanta. Chicago used to be the mecca of black opportunity. And that's why people migrated here. And when that was the case, Chicago was a better city. Today, blacks are bailing out of Chicago 100 miles an hour. And where's everybody going? They're going to it. Yeah, they're going to Atlanta because they think there's hope and dignity there.
Mm-hmm.
So what I'm saying is that through voluntary cooperation, you give people opportunity, but that entrepreneurial opportunity ought to tie to social capital. So that if you get an opportunity, you have to take responsibility for bringing other people along. And I'm saying we're all vested in this system of free enterprise, but not everybody believes in it. So by proving that the free enterprise system works through the voluntary cooperation of people of goodwill, then we will protect what's important. And I believe the most important thing in this country is free enterprise. And we have moved away from that. which I don't call it capitalism. It is voluntary cooperation.
Right. He is Robert Blackwell. Just do business with Black entrepreneurs ready to deliver meaningful value. That's his message. Alpha Mission is the organization, is the movement. alphamission.com if you want more information on what Robert Blackwell and others are attempting to do. You want to participate in particular. alphamission.com. Robert Blackwell, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
All right, guys. Thanks. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks, you too. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
There's only one radio show in Chicago talking about today's biggest stories and telling you what they really mean. That show is this one, Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560, The Answer.
It seems like everyone is on a complicated diet these days. Gluten-free, keto, metabolic, sugar-free. And with these diets comes special dietary protocol and food products. You can find plenty of advice on your social media sites, but you need expertise to purchase the right food items. A visit to Lil's Dietary Specialty Shop is necessary to shop the best food choices for a medical diet or health plan. Lil's Dietary Specialty Shop stocks all the hard-to-find foods you're looking for, like wheat and dairy alternatives, sugar-free baking mixes, healthy snacks, and more. There's